got it. Wonderful. That was a beautiful preparation. We welcome our next guest speaker, dear brother Maarten. We all know him from the Hollywood Center. So a little bit about Maarten. After moving from Netherlands to California in 1985, Maarten was first introduced to the teachings of Sri Sathya Sai Baba in the early 90s. Swami's presence, teachings, and love have been the guiding light in his personal, professional, and spiritual journey, and the foundation of the Maarten's life ever since. Maarten has made numerous trips to Prashanti Nilayam to receive Swami's darshan. In the USA, he became involved with the young adult program and with the Sathya Sai Baba Center of Santa Barbara. When he moved to Los Angeles in 1996, he became involved with the Sathya Sai Baba Center of Hollywood. There he served as a president for 4 years and met his wife, Tarini, with whom he has 2 children, beautiful children. Maarten and Tarini got married in the Shiva temple where Swami was born. Currently, Maarten serves as a young adult advisor for the Region 8. Okay. Welcome, Maarten. We're looking forward to hear your sharing.
Thank you, Daniela. Dear Lord, I pray that whatever message is supposed to be conveyed this evening will come across with clarity to everybody here online this evening. And I pray that the words spoken this evening are your words. And thank you, Swami, for this opportunity to share the experiences you've blessed all of us with. Jai Saram. So yeah, that's thank you, Daniela. Thank you for everybody for giving me this opportunity to share. It's always an opportunity because it gives us a chance to kind of relive the path that we've walked to get to this point. So the Swami's Leelas, and that's always a blissful thing to go through, blissful process. So I know that some of you online have probably heard maybe a sharing or two before of mine, and I want to try to keep it somewhat fresh. I was trying to put it in 2 sections. The first section would be really from the beginning to how Baba led me to this point, and then where we go from here. And the second phase, I don't really know if we'll even have time for that this evening. I have about half an hour, and then there's about 10 minutes for questions. So we'll see how far we get, and if not, maybe the second phase is for, or the second section is for another time. If you have any questions during my sharing, just feel free to raise your hand or yell out, say, hey, I have a question, that's fine. And so that way it's interactive, which is always preferable, I think. So let me go back to when I was first born. I was baptized, which would seem to indicate that I had somewhat of a religious background. However, we never really practiced religion in my family. I was brought up in a very loving family, but we never really went to church. You know, every once in a while, maybe I remember 1 or 2 or 3 times, my dad would read from the Bible during Christmas or something like that. So that's the extent of my quote unquote religious upbringing. So it was very, very little. However, somehow God had planted some seeds within me from a very early age. I remember when I was maybe about 8 or 9 or 10, a very young kid. I remember I was riding my bicycle, which is very common in the Netherlands. I was riding my bicycle and I was thinking, you know, if Jesus Christ is the Son of God, I would really love to know the Father. And of course, very little did I know at that time that some 15 years later, in a very different part of the world, I would discover the Kali Yuga Purna Avatar Sri Sathya Sai Baba. What a blessing that was. And how did that happen? I moved to America and happened to go to college here in Santa Barbara, where I met a good friend who became a very good friend of mine, and my roommate, Greg Slee, whom many of you will know as the regional devotional coordinator. And his mom discovered Sathya Sai Baba and started reading books. And was very enthusiastic about what she read and what she saw and experienced also from trips to India, and then started to work on Greg to see if she could convince him to also start learning about the teachings of Sathya Sai Baba. But that was kind of met with some skepticism and some pushback. And he and I kind of had a good chuckle about it from time to time. And so then at some point he went on vacation with his mom, and she started really telling him, you got to read this book, and it's a Sathya Sai Baba book, you got to read this. And they kind of got in an argument. And that night he had a dream in which he saw himself arguing with his mom, and then all of a sudden Sathya Sai Baba appeared in this dream. And Baba took him in this golden light and lifted him up, and he was floating, and he had this magical experience in this dream. And so it was something that he never shared with me. He felt that if he did, then maybe I would think that he also had lost his marbles. So he was very careful with not sharing it for that time. But over time, we did start talking about it, and I got kind of curious. So at some point, I happened to go to the library in Santa Barbara, and just, as these things go with Baba, miraculously, two books popped out. One was Arnold Schumann's book called Baba, and the other one was Jack Hislop's book, My Baba and I. And they were the perfect books for me to read as a novice. Arnold Schumann's book, Arnold Schumann is a playwright, so he writes movies. He's a very good storyteller. And he basically, it's like a documentary. He says in the book, I'm going to just write down what I experience, what I see, what I experience. And so in a book, so many amazing things happen. I can't really get into that, but it was a fantastic book. And at the end of the book, he does not become a Sai devotee. And there is a section I will read you later, but he's basically, the reason he doesn't become a Sai devotee is because Baba says, I want you to surrender and to surrender to God and give me your heart, etc. And then Arnold Schumann says, I've worked all my life to become an individual, and I can't do that. So he ended up basically not becoming a devotee. And so that actually, in my opinion, kind of lent a lot of credibility to the book. So I got very curious after reading that book, and Greg and I started, we started listening to bhajans, we started doing some little seva projects here and there, and convalescent homes, and the rescue mission there. And then finally, at some point, we went to the Sri Sathya Sai Baba Center of Santa Barbara. And the first time I went there, it was very interesting. People were very sweet there, but it was also slightly a culture shock. With the robe and all, people sort of bowing down before that was all new to me, and I thought it was just something I was not used to. So the following day, I'm driving in my car. Many of you guys know the story. The next day, I'm driving in my car, and I'm thinking back of that night before at the Sathya Sai Baba Center in Santa Barbara. And my exact thoughts, I had come to a stop at a traffic light, and my thoughts were, this stuff is Sai Baba and God, and it's just not for me. Those were my exact thoughts. The instant I looked up in front of me on a license plate, it said the letters G-O-D, the letters G-O-D-I-S, the number 4, and the letter U. So here I have a prop, so you can see it. So that's, is it in reverse? I don't know if you can see it, but anyway, you got the point. So the thoughts were, the stuff with Sai Baba and God is not for me. And instantly I look up and it says God is for you on the license plate. That's crazy. I mean, that's just amazing. That's not just sort of coincidence. I've never really believed of coincidence, but this was amazing. So it was my first little sign, or not even a little sign, it was the first sign from Baba, how he was coming into my life, so to speak. And so we continued doing seva projects, and we had these little leelas where if we would think of doing a seva project, whether we should do it or not, all of a sudden there would be like this fragrance of jasmine. So we had all those little things that would happen to us. And so then finally I ended up with a the Sathya Sai Baba dream, my very first Baba dream that I had. And in that dream, I happened to end up being face to face with Swami, and he opens his right hand with the palm up, and he materializes these beautiful, colorful stones, like green, red, clear, blue, but of a color that that's out of this world. Is really the best way to describe it. Just absolutely gorgeous with the palm up. So it was something maybe in the back of my mind. I had been reading a lot of stories about Swami materializing things, and that he goes like this. So I was always kind of curious why he would do like that. But in this dream, he went like this, and boom, there it came. And there was one other little thing that was kind of cute. While he materialized those stones, there was this really high-pitched, beautiful, sort of celestial, heavenly chime sound. And I've always tried to find it, and the closest I was able to get is like this. I don't know if you can hear it, but well, this doesn't do much. It's another prop that doesn't really work, but it was just magical in the dream, what happened. And so as he was materializing this, I literally fell to the floor, just flat out with my entire body, flat on the floor, but prostrating before him, saying, "You are God, you are God, you are God." And that was my first dream, and really very significant experience that I had with Swami. And that was followed not much later by another even more impactful Baba dream, in which I was with, in that dream, I was with Baba sort of in a big crowd. We were sort of in the auditorium, and he and I were sort of in the center of it. And I asked Baba what it's like to be in heaven. And then he stretched out his hand, and as I took hold of his hand, I had an experience that strangely I was never able really to remember. Like the moment I woke up from it, which this dream was so impactful, it woke me up. And when I woke up, the whole experience was kind of pulled out of me. It was just, I could never relate to it or remember it or describe it or anything like that. But I assume that since I asked him what it's like to be in heaven, that it must have been that. And I'll tell you later in the sharing this evening, I actually had a chance to ask him personally about that dream. But so I was so, it was such an, to me, it really showed who he really, really is. Only God can give you something like that, even though, again, I was not able to remember it or describe it or relate to it. And many years later, I realized why I was not probably allowed to, or it was in my best interest not to remember it or not to relate to that dream. And that's probably because if I would have been able to relate to it and remember it and kind of feel it, then I don't know how interested I would have been in just life. It's just one of these things where it was so out of this world, this experience, that you'd want to go back there, and that you're not going to find that in this life. So I think that's the reason I was not able to really relate to it and remember it. But anyway, so those experiences that I just shared made me more and more, want to follow his teachings. And so as I was continuing to follow his teachings and going to do little seva projects here and there, nothing major, just little things. But somehow in that period, everything turned very difficult in my life. I had my own business, and all of a sudden orders stopped coming in, and it was very hard to make a living. And I consider that to be a period that Swami calls the unmaking and remaking of us, right? He's kind of just takes everything away. So in order for us to be unmade, so that he can remake us. And I remember the peak of that, or the bottom, if you will, was when we had a big flood in Santa Barbara. There was like 14 inches of rain in a 12-hour period. And my office that I had there, it went completely underwater. So I remember kind of waiting, walking to my office. The water was like chest high. And it's like, oh my God, I mean, what but dear God, what do you want me to do? I mean, I remember thinking, you know what, I surrender it all to you. Thy will be done. If you want me to go back to the Netherlands, I go back to the Netherlands. Whatever you want me to do. I was pretty desperate at the time. And again, this was sort of the height of the unmaking and probably the beginning of the remaking. So at that point, I ended up, with his grace, getting an offer to come work in Los Angeles. So I ended up moving to LA and got introduced to the beautiful Hollywood Sci Center. Carlos and Ella, they were just exuding all this love, and fell in love with the center and everybody there. It was such a beautiful place. And as all of you probably know, it's the oldest center. So it has it was an important place for me to go to. And I became involved with the center. We ended up doing a number of trips to India. The first trip I made, I'll go into that first now, was in 1997. It was the first World Youth Conference that we went to, and Greg went there as well, and Eric Wing, whom probably most of you will know him as the president for the Region 8. And we had an amazing time. And it turned out that on that trip, this is probably a story for another time, or we'll have to get Greg to come over to share, but he ended up on that trip, he ended up getting married to a beautiful, wonderful lady who lived at the time in Puttaparthi, the sister of Sureka Vasant, and it went through Baba dreams and communications with Baba through dreams and letters, etc., that they figured out that she was the perfect wife for him. So on that trip, he had never met her before. They had never met each other. They ended up getting married. So it was quite an impactful trip, as you can imagine, when your best friend is all of a sudden getting married to somebody he's never met before. That was quite something. So on that very first trip, also actually, I skipped over something. When we first arrived there, it was very interesting. We came as young adults, hoping we would be delegates, but because we were a little bit over the age that they had set at that time, we ended up not being delegates. And because of that, there wasn't enough room. There weren't enough rooms in the ashram for people who weren't delegates. So they ended up telling us, no, you can't stay at the ashram. You have to stay outside. So we were quite disappointed in that. And as we were walking out through the main gate where you come in through with your car, if you do that, you're passing sort of through that square area that's right in front of the Kulwant Hall, where you have these massive metal gates that open up for when Swami comes with his car. And so as we were walking past there, who do we all of a sudden see standing outside the gates? And nobody in the square. The square was empty. I mean, maybe there were, I don't know, a handful of people. And at the time, I didn't realize how unique and crazy that is. I mean, that's just unheard of. But it was Swami standing outside the gates and doing a double blessing. And it was just, Greg and Frank, and it was, 4 or 5 of us walking past there. And to get that was just remarkable. I mean, that was the very first time I saw Swami. That was my very first darshan in real life. So quite an impact. It was a beautiful trip and with lots of experiences. And as I mentioned, the wedding, of course, was a very big and impactful part of the trip. And then there were a number of other trips that I made, and finally there was. We went a couple times with the Hollywood Center, and then finally there was one trip, and Gene, I'm sure you remember this one well, when Gene was working on the creation movie for Baba, very big project, and Baba had Gene in almost daily. It was amazing in the interview room, and so at some point Baba said, tomorrow I will give an interview to a group. So we were informed that the following day we would get an interview, and I got my list of questions ready, and we all prepared. And the following day, indeed, Swami called us in, and I kind of came in. I kind of stayed in the back a little bit, so I was kind of at the very back, and I had my list of questions. And all of a sudden, Swami points his finger to me sitting in the back. And he answers the very first question on my list. A question nobody knew what that question was. I did. And it was a very personal question, and well, okay, that's clearly omniscience, right? I mean, there's no arguing that. When he knows what's on your list of questions before you even ask it, that's a clear indication as to his omniscience. So then at some point in the interview, he motions me to come forward, and I end up sitting at his feet. And I think he said something, I think Ella said something like, oh yeah, he's a good boy or something. And Swami said, yeah, good boy. And then Baba started waving his hand, and he materialized a ring. And that ring is very meaningful to me. It's the Navaratnam ring that Baba explained. He put it on my finger. He said, perfect fit. And then he proceeded to put it on my finger. So he's also, again, showing his omniscience. No, he knows the size of my finger. Perfect fit. And it has these, the stones, the colorful stones, which is kind of what the type of stones that I saw in the Baba materialize in the dream. So it kind of I came full circle with that. I was so blown away by it. I grabbed his hand, I kissed his hand. And then I stayed sort of there in the area, right sort of in front of him, a little bit to the side. And he kept materializing so many things for people in the interview room. He materialized a cup of vibhuti, like, I mean, it's like this big, and boom, there it was. And I remember seeing at some point he was waving his hand and saw this necklace come out of his palm of his hand, and it came out with such velocity, with such force. It looked like it had fallen from like a 10-story building. Amazing, it just shot out of his hand, and he could just in time grab it, handed it to one of the ladies, and yeah, it was just absolutely amazing to sit there experiencing all of those miracles just in front of me, just absolutely amazing. And then at some point, I'm not 100% sure if that was in it. I had in that on that trip 2 interviews. I don't remember if on the first interview or on the second interview, he pointed at me and said, "Do you want marriage?" And I answered initially, I said, "Oh, whatever is your will, Swami." And then, so at this point, he was standing and I was sitting. And then he turned around after I gave him that answer. And so he was now with his back to me. And then he turned back and he pointed his finger again at me, and he was very intense with his eyes. He said, "No, but do you want marriage?" And my answer was, "I think it might be a good thing at some point." Swami. So, well, you all know that a couple of years later, I met this wonderful, amazing, beautiful lady at the Hollywood Science Center, and we ended up getting married. But I'll go into that a little bit. I'll stay chronological, so I'll go into that a little bit later. So back to this trip where we had these interviews. So in this very first interview, when it's over, Swami says, he's kind of motioning me to move and go out the door, but I felt that was impolite. You don't, the Kali Yuga Purnavtar, you don't go walking in front of him. You let him go first. But he insisted, and I said, no, go. He said, go. And then as I started walking, he put his hands on my shoulder. He was behind me and put his hands on my shoulders, and he started straightening out my scarf. And it was an amazing feeling. The Kali Yuga Purnavtar, he put his hand on my shoulders, straightening out the scarf. I was in heaven. It was unbelievable. And there was one other thing in that interview also that had happened. He, at some point, he kind of rubbed sort of my chest or my belly, and it gave me this sort of the feeling of butterflies. It's the best way to describe it, but very intense. Not just butterflies. When you have a feeling of butterflies in your stomach, it's super intense, and it lasted for hours. And so I don't know what he did, but he probably did something that I needed. At any rate, then that first interview ended up, that was over, and then several days later we had a second interview, and I don't know, I kind of felt so it was just, I don't want to say saturated, but it was just so overflowing for me. The first interview, he also gave me a robe, and it's like, I'm going to stay in the back, and I've got my fill. I stay in the back. So in the second interview, I really stayed in the back. I didn't really say anything. And then when that interview came to an end, we actually also went into the private interview where he gave a little sort of discourse. And then at the end of that second interview, I kind of regretted not taking advantage of being with the Kali Gunavatara and not asking questions and things like that. There was a hell of a question. So then I ended up, at the end of that second interview, I ended up standing right before him, and he was like really close. And I said, Swami, I have so many questions. And he looked at me and he said, ask. And so I started asking him about that dream that I had, that second dream, where I had asked him to be, what it's like to be in heaven. And as I start describing the dream, he interrupts me and he says, where's heaven? And I don't know, what do you say to a question like that? When God stands before you and he asks, where's heaven? What do you answer? So I was just not able to really utter a word. And then he helped me out and he said, he put his hand on my heart and said, heaven is in the heart. And then he said, hell is in the head. So powerful, so simple, so profound, amazing. So he didn't really go into the dream part, but he gave me a message that stuck with me for the rest of my life. So we can all get so much out of that. We can all remember that that's the truth, obviously, for everybody. This message is for everybody. The heaven is in the heart, head is in the head. So follow the heart and leave the mind as far away as possible, because it's full of Maya. So anyway, again, an absolutely beautiful experience. Let me see. I want to make sure I don't skip anything. So yeah, then came the point where we went back home, and as I mentioned, I met Tiny, my wonderful wife to be, and we wanted to confirm with Swami that this was a marriage that he would be blessing. And so I went back to India. But right before I went back, Tiny had a Baba dream in which she and I were sitting like as an altar right before Swami, and he held his hands above our heads and showered us with vibhuti. That was Baba dream she had. That was right before I left for India to ask Swami for his blessings for this marriage. And oh, by the way, before I did this trip, I skipped something. Before I went on this trip and before she had that dream, I happened to meet Tiny's parents at the Hollywood Center, and something amazing happened. I've never had that before. It was like when I met them, it was like, it wasn't really a voice, but a feeling like, okay, well, yeah, meet your parents-in-law. These are your parents-in-law. It was a prompting. It's not really a voice, like I said, but just something really clearly, and it's just telepathically or whatever. Somehow it came into me. These are your parents-in-law. So that was already a very good indicator that this was meant to be. So then again, I got ready for that trip. She had this amazing dream right before I left, and we ended up going to Whitefield that trip. And initially, Baba didn't take the letter in which I was asking for the blessings, and he just kept not taking it for a while. And then finally, he did take it, and there was clear indication that he was blessing this marriage. And so then a little bit later on, we also made sure that my father-in-law, he basically did the same, also had a letter for Swami, and Baba took that letter as well. And so, as Daniela pointed out in the introduction, Tiny and I, we got married in the Shiva temple. That's the place where Swami was born. And so we consider it a fantastic, wonderful blessing. And now we've been married almost for 20 years. In August, we'll be married for 20 years, and we have two beautiful kids, 15 and almost 17 years old. So you can see how Swami works, and you can see the impact he's had on my life. He's proven to me very clearly, without any doubt, that he's omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. So as far as sort of, Daniela had sent me a list of some questions, so I wanted to get a little bit into, my life transformed quite a bit. I became vegetarian. I've now been for over 30 years. I've been vegetarian. I see, the teachings, and I wanted to go a little bit more into the teaching. I don't really know if I have time for that. It's already 8:20, so maybe that's for another time or next time. But the teachings of Advaita, of oneness, I've always felt in my heart that is how life works. I remember I wrote an essay in my English class once about how, to me, it's not necessary to go to church. This is also answering that question I mentioned earlier. We never went to church, or unless it was like for Christmas once or twice. But I don't need to be in a building to feel holy or feel close to God. We need to feel him. He's everywhere, right? If you believe in God, you got to believe in his omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience. So for me, I always felt that God is everywhere. He's all-knowing, and then it also matches with science. I mean, we know that Einstein has literally scientifically proven that the only thing that exists is energy. So everything that's matter, everything you can see, feel, touch, and hear, anything in existence, is the building blocks for that is just energy. And so Baba's teachings of Advaita, it matches with all of that. And of course, he's inclusive with all the religions. He's the fact that it's not like, oh, you gotta believe in this religion, or you gotta be in trouble, or it's all religions. And was exactly how I felt all my life, kind of how it is. And so the teachings match perfectly with what I always believed. And then of course, part of the teachings, equanimity and surrender and all of these things, so important in life. It's been a big help. I would get worked up in work-related things. You get really excitable over certain things. But then when you realize that everything is his will, the good and bad, it's his will. It is for our own good, even if something happens that you don't consider to be or how you want it to be. It's his will, and so it's best for us. He always says, Swami says, think like this, it's good for me, it's good for me, it's good for me. So even when things happen that are considered to be not that great, if you repeat that to yourself and remind yourself, it's good for me, it's good for me, it's good for me, it's so important. That has been so impactful in my life. Very simple seeds that we planted, very simple messages. Even love all serve all, help ever, hurt never. Who can argue with that? I mean, it's beautiful. So the teachings are so profound and have been a great help in my life. And I'm so incredibly grateful for all these teachings. I can't imagine life without him. And then that kind of brings me a little bit to the next point. And I don't think we really have time to go into this, but I've done a lot of research. And those of you who know me well, I have a strong feeling that yes, we know Prema Sai is coming, and it's wonderful. I can't wait for that. But Baba has said himself that by the time Prema Sai comes, there's going to be peace in the world. And when you dig into what he has said about these things, you come away thinking, well, maybe some really big event may happen prior to that. And I was going to go to that a little bit, but maybe that's better left for next time. And I don't know if there are, it's 8:25, so are there any questions? We've got 5, instead of 10, we have 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, I'm sure we have plenty of questions. You go,
Good.
you go first.
Sairam, Martin,
Sairam, buddy.
thank you for sharing. I had one or two questions. I mean, when Baba said there is no difference between you and I, you are God, and also his all name, all form. What do you think about that? So you can share.
He's all names and all forms.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do I think about it? Well, you and I have had.
And you are God. There's no difference between you and I.
Yeah, you and I have had very great conversation that we're gonna. I remember when you and I were in Prashanti on one trip. DJ shared that before too. We were very blessed, just him and I, to go together to see the Lord of the universe, and we had a great trip, and we had lots of great, interesting debates. And one of them was about all is His will, right? It's all His will, and then also the oneness, right? God is in everyone and everything. I think the best way. The way I understand it, the best way I can describe it is it's actually almost kind of simple, and it's based on Advaita. And it's, if you have a dream, and you can have a dream that's, let's say you have a dream that's not where a lot of stuff happens that's not very good. Let's say you have a dream and you're in a car accident. Just your brand new car just got totaled, right? And then you wake up from the dream and you're like, oh my God, thank God it was just a dream. But everything seemed so real. The car seemed real, the accidents, everything seemed real, really impactful. And in the end, you wake up and none of it was real. The car wasn't real. You getting into an accident wasn't real. None of it is real. It's just energy in that dream. And the same it's the exact same thing in life. On a different plane, on a different level. It's all just energy, that's proven. And so, yes, there's only the one, there's only that. Swami says, Soham, I am that, I am, that's it. In the Bible, there's also this dialogue between, I think it's Moses and the burning bush. And he asks, who should I say send this message? And says, I am, that's the name of God, I am. And so it's just that, I am. When you say I am DJ, or I am Jean, or I am Daniela, or whoever, you say I am. Yes, you are. You're God. So if you're God and I'm God, we're all God. It's just like in that dream. It's just an energy. And it's all pure oneness. And so why, and that's the thing, is that when you turn on the news and you see all this fighting and hatred and all this strange stuff that's happening, I'm convinced, I have no doubt that this is all His will, of course, because it is. But why are we doing this? We're all one. It's so silly. And so that's why He's come. That's why He's come, is to wake us up. And like I said, there's more to come. And when you do the research and you dig into a little deeper, He's given us a lot of, if you look at all the things that Swami has said while he was here in the form, it is absolutely amazing as to what he has said will happen. And a lot of that still has to happen. And I believe, without any doubt, that it will. I have zero doubt. Because you turn on the news and it's just like is prophesized in all the, not just in all the different religions. They're talking about a time where there's political corruption, there's bizarre weather, there's materialism, there is all of these things, and it's like it's like just turning on the news. And so there's going to be this is why he came to teach, and there's more to come. There's just too much to go into that, but he's talked about it. He's talked about how I don't know if I shouldn't go into it because it goes too far, but just to go back to your question, DJ, because I'm kind of going into the weeds. Sorry, but yes, it's all one. It's all Advaita. And does that answer your question, DJ?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have another question from Miss M. If you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I thank you so much, Martin. That was really beautiful. And can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions, but there's this one, unless I can do more. Okay, so when Baba pointed at you and he said, "Do you want to get married?" And you said, well, whatever God wants, or whatever you said, whatever is your will.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really beautiful, and that's like the ideal, and it's so hard sometimes to surrender that. But then Baba came back and he said, do you want to get married? So what do you think that meant? I mean, what's, because we're supposed to, we're encouraged to, say, if it's your will, but Baba came back to you and said, what do you want? So how do you interpret that?
That is such a good question, really good question. Thank you for asking that question. So, and the reason why it's such a good question is I struggled with it too, as you can tell, because I gave two different answers. First, I said, whatever is your will. And then he was so forceful. He said, but what do you want? So I had to go deeper inside. So what, and I guess deeper inside.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I analyzed it, I actually felt, Swami, the best way to convey your message is to have sort of a very, how would I say this? A lifestyle where, you have wife and kids and you have work and you do your sort of your usual normal thing. That's maybe that's a more effective way than if I end up being sort of a loner and maybe, or a sannyasi who goes to the forest. If I'm some yogi who goes off, and sits in a cave somewhere, maybe that would be good for me too. If he would have told me that, I would have struggled with it, right? I don't know if I'm ready for that. So he knows. He knew. Of course, he's the one who gave that answer in the end. Because deep down, I know he's the one that's feeding all of this to me. But so I felt deep down very comfortable about the fact that I think getting married maybe is a good thing. And for those reasons that I just mentioned, I think it's if you have that kind of a lifestyle rather than being in whatever, just going to the ashram or as they would say, go to the forest. I thought it was more effective to be married. So that was kind of the thinking behind the second time I answered the question after he pushed me for it. But in the end, it's him doing everything. He's the one that gave the first answer. He's the one that gave the second answer. That's just how I see it. But thank you so much for that question. That's really good. Did you have other questions? It sounded like you had more questions too.
I think I forgot my other question.
Good, wonderful. Anyone else have questions for Maarten? I certainly have one question. It says on your resume that you received darshan, sparshan, and sambhashan. So what's the difference between them? Can you explain, elaborate a little bit?
Well, it's basically darshan is seeing the Lord, and then you have touching the Lord and communicating with the Lord. So those are the three.
Okay.
Sparshan, I think, is touching. Sambhashan is the communication, I believe. So
thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's. I know, yeah, that's it.
So when you seen him first in a Buddha party, didn't you want to run for him? He was right in front of you when you arrived, right?
It's also a really good question because I didn't go much into detail there. I had my guitar with me, and I literally, when I saw him, I dropped my guitar and I just dropped on my knees. And I was probably, I don't know, far away because I was on the other side, well, not far away, but I was on the other side of that courtyard there, right in front of Kuwan Hall, and there was nobody there and nobody in between. So I was thinking, what am I going to do here? So I said, I kind of just went on my knees and sort of like, thank you, Baba, like this. And you're right, I should have run. I never thought of that. That's what I should have done. But there's a lot of things that I learned when you see Baba, when you get his darshan. Is number one, it's like you kind of almost don't have any control over what you're saying. So it's like almost like he just sort of takes over. It's really weird. I can't explain it. Like this question about when I asked him, when I went back to that dream to ask him the question, of all the questions I could have asked him, really, when I thought about it afterwards, why did I want to ask him that? I mean, I know what I went through in my dream. There's so many other questions, but that's the question I asked. And in the end, it was very impactful. And I took it with me for the rest of my life. So it was a big help. But he's the one who planted that question in my head. And so there's other things too. The very first darshan I had was on that where he stands outside the gates. But then I had darshans after that where you go into the Kulwan, you get a line, you sit in the front or more a little bit in the back. And I sat a couple of them in the front and I felt nothing. It was so weird. It was shocking. When I was in the Hollywood Center and we were doing pageants and the roof would come off the house with the energy, it was one thing. And then here I am in front of him and I see him and I felt nothing. So, and again, the reason I'm saying that is he's the one that's doing that stuff. And he's just shaking you up like, God, and there were so many things I was going to share tonight. It's like, that's part of he says that he shakes the nail to see if it's sturdy enough in the wall to hold the picture.
Mhm.
That's what he's doing with our faith. He's shaking it to see if it's strong enough. And this is the thing I was going to talk about in the second phase of this talk, is like, if you listen to his words that he uttered while he was in the form on earth, there's much more to come. You cannot deny it. And the more you dig into it, the more you find out about it, the more prophecies you read about this thing. It's so crystal clear. He just gave it all these little pieces of the puzzle, all these dots to be connected. And when you dig into it, it's absolutely astounding. So there's much more to come. Get ready, folks, because there's going to be lots of changes coming.
We're ready. Anyone else? Jean, you have any questions for Maarten?
No, I'm just still blown away by what a wonderful talk he's given, and I'm so happy to have him. I really think we should have him again, have him do the second part.
Wonderful. We'll send you the list of questions so you come prepared, yeah? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Maarten. Thank you so much for sharing. Beautiful, beautiful sharing with us.